All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. Thank you, Scott. Hello, everyone. I'm Brian Walker. Thank you for joining the July 2020 Commerce Pulse update. It's a beautiful morning here in Seattle. Hopefully, you also have good weather. We're right in the thick of what is typically our best weather of the year in the Pacific Northwest. It's been a little bit warm for our liking, but we're getting used to that, unfortunately. But it's clear, sunny, very nice weather. So hopefully you're also able to enjoy some good weather and some time off this time of year. Let's go ahead and get started. This morning, I will be joined again by my colleague, Christine Lee. She'll be covering the search updates and slides. There we go. She'll be covering the search terms and search updates here. Oh, I forgot to turn off the music. I was enjoying it too much. Sorry about that. I just realized I was talking over the music. Apologies to everyone out there. Christine will be joining us here a little bit later to talk about what's happening with search terms specifically during the month of July, and to compare that versus last year and kind of have a look at what's happening. And obviously that's a big story behind the data and the results, right? The changing customer demand and interest by segment, by category. It really tells a pretty compelling story of how much the pandemic has impacted all of us and how we lead our lives, how we work. And so I think it's always interesting to look at the search terms themselves. Before we get into the heart of it, I just do want to take a moment just to talk about a couple of key things that you might also be interested in. First of all, those of you who've joined us before know about the State of Commerce Experience Report. That report is now available. If you don't have a copy of it, strongly encourage you to get a hold of it. Those of you who have not joined us here before, this is a report that really looks at North American, UK, and German e-commerce markets, both before and after the start of the pandemic. Gives us a chance to look at both B2C and B2B, the buyers and consumers, how their behavior and needs have changed, and obviously how the business priorities of those serving those customers have changed. Strongly encourage you to check out that report. It's got a lot of really interesting information and data in there that I think could be useful for you and useful for your organizations to understand. And to that effect, we actually have another upcoming event, August 20th. This is a virtual event focused on B2C in North America. So retail and brands going direct. Forrester will again be joining us to present this data and the insights, together with our partners, Gorilla Group, part of the WPP organization, and National Vision. So I encourage you to join us for that virtual event. If you're involved in direct-to-consumer, retail, or brands going direct, I would encourage you to join, give you some real interesting insights into the attitudes and changes of the consumer and what your competitors and other businesses are doing in response to that. And last, a little plug for our State of Commerce Experience podcast that's coming out at this point bi-weekly, a little bit of a summer slowdown. We'll see, we may pick it back up or we may stick to a bi-weekly cadence, but now we're up to, I think, episode 20 or 21. I'm losing track a little bit. Lots of great conversations in there with leaders from around the world of e-commerce and digital. Range of perspectives, a range of experiences represented there. I encourage you to check it out. And thank you all for the great feedback. Been really appreciative of that. Been asked about the Commerce Pulse data and what's the source of the data. It's actually really simple. It's the aggregation of Bloomreach customers, which now represents over 500 global brands and enterprise businesses selling online and across digital channels. Collectively, Bloomreach customers are now selling at over 200 billion in annual sales. That would be the equivalent of about 25% of retail e-commerce in the US and the UK, second only to Amazon. Of course, there is a mix of B2B in there and other things, but it's just about giving you a sense of the scale of the data we're reporting based on. And obviously, our reporting here focuses in on two key geographies, North America, obviously US and Canada, and then the UK and Europe. Most of our customers are in Northern Europe, just so you're aware. And obviously the customer segments we'll go through. And just a quick little note, when we talk about search traffic and search sales, we're really talking about on-site search as we go through the data. Okay, before we get into this week's data, sorry, a little latency here on the slides. There we go. Before we get into this week's last month's data, I should say, I do want to highlight some key customers who have really excelled. Whoops, excuse me, having some Zoom snafus. There we go. All of this information is public, so we're not revealing anything that our customers haven't shared in the press. If you're interested in where these stories came from, or you want to read more about the results from these great customers of ours, most of this was reshared via our various LinkedIn channels, so you can certainly find it there. But just some terrific customer success. Obviously what's behind a lot of the change in consumer demand and leveraging of the digital channels is not necessarily something we're happy about. But it's great to see these businesses able to capitalize, leveraging tools like what we provide from Bloomreach to see some terrific, significant business growth and compensate for what may be happening elsewhere in their businesses, or to really, frankly, grow market share and share of wallet with customers. And we're really proud to serve these and many other customers. And just wanted to highlight a number of these. Obviously, I'm sure you're skimming the screen as I talk here, so you can see it for yourself. Just some phenomenal results here, leveraging a combination of solutions from Bloomreach to make that happen, be it our search and merchandising solutions, our content solutions, our full BRX platform, and driving organic traffic through our SEO product and serving customers in a personalized way. So obviously very pleased here. And these are just a handful of customers who comprise some of the data that we have aggregated. So let's get into the headlines here. Hopefully the build works. There we go. Obviously, multiple factors played into the July 2020 results. We had a kind of an interesting month. Really, if you think back to late June, early July, we were hopefully in a point where we were starting to see the coronavirus lockdowns being eased, entering into new phases, and starting to think about a recovery of the offline economy and wondering what that might do to the online results. Certainly, in different parts of the world, this has played out differently. Here in the United States, the southern tier states in particular have seen a significant spike, obviously, in the virus. Many of those locations have had to go back into some form of quarantine or shutdown. And meanwhile, really the entire country is really kind of on pins and needles, dealing with a lot of uncertainty around the impact of the virus and trying to get control over it. Canada, obviously also incorporated into our data, still very much in a form of lockdown, even though the virus is somewhat under control in Canada, thankfully. The country is got borders more or less closed and obviously is still suffering through many of the economic impacts the virus has. And then, of course, in Europe, thankfully, the virus at this point in time, there are still pockets of issues, but the virus seems more or less under control. But speaking with people in Europe, what I'm hearing is that there remains a lot of uncertainty. Is there going to be a second wave? What happens when the kids go back to school? And so it's a combination of things that really impacted July. And I think that's somewhat reflected in the numbers. Let's get into those. In North America, total sales actually dropped nearly 5% month over month. So that's July 2020 compared to June 2020. But of course, remained quite strong when you're looking at it year over year at plus 25% year over year versus July 2019, and still up an impressive 34.74% year to date compared to 2019 year to date. So we see that there's this sort of plateau. I mean, minus 5% seems like a lot in ordinary times. During the COVID crisis, that seems pretty modest change month over month, but we can see that things kind of settled in. And we saw a bit of a dip early on in July. And then, of course, as things started to have to be shut down again, we saw that started to return toward the end of the month and start to spike again. Meanwhile, in the UK and Europe, again, total sales down 4.71% month over month, but remained moderately strong year over year, and a more modest 9.51% year to date compared to 2019. Europe has not seen quite the same highs and not quite the same changes, and of course is in a different phase of recovery. In much of Europe having seen improvement with respect to the virus sooner. Segment results are quite mixed. The only segment in positive territory month over month, that would be, again, July 2020 versus June 2020, was home furnishings at plus 8.75% month over month, and a kind of an incredible 48.3% year over year improvement month over month. So home furnishings, and we'll get into the segment data later, and I think hopefully that will help illustrate some of the what's going on there with home furnishings. But obviously, people are naturally spending money on their homes. They're working from home. They're educating kids from home. They're doing a lot of things from home. Might as well spend disposable income on improving that environment. In some cases, things that they may have wanted to address some time ago and just hadn't prioritized, right? Maybe choosing to do other things. And since people aren't taking the big vacations, aren't spending money in the same way with dining out and so forth, they're channeling that money into other categories, obviously. People are shopping, but not buying to the same degree in grocery. Grocery did see the most dramatic drop month over month at minus 29.44%, which is obviously pretty significant, but with positive traffic at the same time. So traffic was up, sales were down, obviously conversion rate was impacted at minus 30.75%. So this shows us that people are using this channel to shop, to search, but they're not buying. That could be a host of different factors. It could be out of stocks. It could be also people are using the online channel to do research and purchase. Sorry, some sensitivity here with zooming my mouse. Let's get back to the next bullet really quick. Just to highlight, many other segments saw modest drops month over month compared to June, but we're showing strong growth in digital commerce sales year over year. So we'll get into obviously the segment data, but as I said, the only one that was up month over month was home furnishings. Grocery was down quite a bit, and most of the others are down modestly month over month, but still remain strong year over year. So let's get into the North America data here really quick. As I shared with you, down 4.92% month over month. We also saw a drop, kind of a modest drop in AOS and conversion in the month. You can see that traffic across North American e-commerce was actually up month over month and still very strong year over year at plus 33.47%. Overall sales up month over month, year over year. I apologize. Year over year at 25.17%. So you can see that this may be the impact on some sales and lower cost product being purchased in the baskets. And you also see that there may be some impact of out of stocks or products that people are looking for they cannot find in the assortment. They may be sold out, which is kind of indicative of the slight increase also in search traffic, but you can see search sales also down. So you can see that there's sort of an interesting behavior here where some of the demand is not connecting in part because of lack of inventory. Let's click into the UK and Europe. I think here we see the effects of the reopening in Europe on traffic, which is down 10.03% month over month. Sales down less so, which you can also see then reflected in the conversion rate at the bottom at plus 10.75%. The relative year over year sales weakness, I think, is reflected in smaller basket sizes, and while AOS and conversion rate improved month over month, you can see a pretty dramatic drop in AOS year to date, which I think really reflects change in purchasing habits, lots of discounting that's been going on. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out through the balance of the year as inventories stabilize on the one hand, but also there's a change, obviously, in consumer demand. Europe, I think, is in kind of an unpredictable phase. Right now, things really feel like they're much better. There's some perhaps slightly less uncertainty, that's a weird way to put it, versus the U.S. market right now. But I think there's some anxiousness in terms of what happens in the fall, especially as the northern parts of Europe go back indoors during the fall. Kids are in school. What will happen with the virus, and what impact will that have in overall consumer spending and overall consumer sentiment, and how will that translate, obviously, into channels such as offline, traditional retail and consumption, and online, obviously. We already talked a little bit about grocery, right? People are clearly leveraging grocery to shop. You can see traffic was actually up month over month at 9% up. You can see it's up 70% year over year, but it's not connecting into sales. You can see a dramatic drop in conversion rate there. Average order size also down. And yet overall traffic and search traffic were up. It tells us that people are using these channels actually in an increasing degree, but it's not actually being connected into checkouts. Again, it could be a combination of factors. Out of stocks, people not finding the products they're looking for, not because the search isn't effective, but because they're sold out. Or we may also very likely be seeing people using these digital channels to search, locate product, and make decisions. Okay, yeah, let's go to the store, and deciding to go ahead and make that trip. And obviously, these are swings of a reasonably high degree, probably a combination of factors that are playing into this, but that's a pretty dramatic swing. So even though grocery was up 23.75% year over year, meaning July 2020 versus July 2019, that's quite a bit less than what we have been seeing in this category, and that's, of course, reflected in the year-to-date numbers. Moving on to general merch, holding a strong, steady line with sales at plus 5.65% month over month and plus 12.37% year over year. Search is obviously very critical to this category. You can see search sales making a pretty dramatic jump here. Very strong conversion rate change month over month sorry, there's a typo there. It's actually plus 15.82%. Apologize for that. With AOS essentially flat, down 10.32% year over year. So some interesting kind of mixed messages here within general merchandise, but overall as a category remaining pretty strong. Kind of a bit of a bounce back from June in this category. Home furnishings, as I mentioned, was the only segment that was in positive sales territory month over month at 8.75%, an impressive 48.3% up year over year. People have very common interests here, seen in the growth in search traffic, pretty strong growth there. And we'll get into the search terms later, and I think that'll tell a little bit more of a story in terms of what products are really driving this category right now. Obviously, people are trying to make themselves comfortable as they spend so much time at home, working from home, etc., but also making sure that they have the patio furniture that they wanted, and all of the kitchen products that they want to make cooking at home more enjoyable, more effective as well. Home DIY, a little bit of a tongue in cheek here. You done with your project? No, not quite, but close. You can see that traffic was down, sales were down a bit less so, um, and while maintaining, obviously very high year to date growth. So this was a category that I think was a bit of a surprise to many, with its very strong growth in e-commerce early on in the pandemic. Now we're seeing that starting to moderate. And I think that's part just timing, right? We're getting later into the summer. People have spent a lot of time on home improvement projects, garden projects, and maybe this is a bit of a timing thing. You can see that AOS is actually up, conversion rate is up. So this is really about overall demand dropping to some degree in this category, at least online. And obviously, with UK, Europe, and North America opening back up to some degree. It may also be that people are returning to maybe some previous shopping habits to some degree. But I think people really do enjoy the curbside pickup, the convenience and safety of that. So I think this is an indication of overall demand shift. Moving on to apparel. Apparel has kind of stabilized a bit, and it had really a lot of impact early on in the pandemic. You can see that somewhat in the numbers on the chart up above, but now has kind of stabilized to some degree. Sales were down 3.42% from June levels, but it's kind of stabilized in a sense. Over the last couple of times last few months we've reported on, you can see that AOS is down a bit. I think that reflects casual and lower cost products being sold, and obviously a conversion rate remaining reasonably stable while search traffic and sales were up. So people are after very specific things. I do think apparel, it'll be interesting to see what happens in the fall season. If the virus continues to persist and leads us to be working still from home, most of us, there's a chance that apparel could really see some big hits year over year. As people really focus on casual, maybe have less demand for clothing. It might lead to some pent up demand. People still, many people still want to shop for apparel. They may also find that they've been wearing the same thing over and over again, and it's time to replace it. So we'll see what happens. But I think this is an interesting category, as all of them are, but certainly to keep our eye on. Luxury also saw a dip in overall sales month over month at minus 7.75%. But you can see year over year still up pretty significantly at plus 32.11%. Search traffic also up, so people are after very specific things, and yet conversion rate is down quite a lot, which means people may be continuing to shop for deals on specific brands and products they've had their eye on, but they're not finding what they're looking for in terms of the product and the assortment at minus 11.37% conversion with traffic up, and that's of course impacting sales. AOS actually held reasonably stable. We had seen some drops. You can see that reflected in the year-to-date number. That's probably a reflection of sale activity. Finally, the last segment to focus on here is B2B. Traffic held steady compared to June, up 38% year over year, but sales were down 5.6% and down 7.36% year over year. I think the big story here is just much smaller basket sizes based on the assortment and mix that people are buying. Obviously, personal protective equipment, sanitizers, gloves, things like this are what's dominating this category still, and that's reflecting in smaller basket sizes. Meanwhile, people may not need as much of what they needed before to run their facilities, to run their restaurants when those are closed. So obviously, this has all those different impacts that we think of as consumers have knock-on effects, obviously, in the economy and in B2B. We're seeing some of that reflected here. Obviously, B2B traffic and in e-commerce is a major growth story. and these channels are being relied on to an increasing degree. But in our data, we see the impacts of the change in channel mix, or assortment mix rather, and the change in demand for B2B. So with that, thank you so much for sticking with me as I got through all the segments. I want to transition over to Christine at this point to talk about some of the search terms from last July. Christine, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks, Brian, for walking us through that. So this first view is a comparison of our top search terms globally in July. That's the first column here, compared year over year to July 2019, and then month over month to June of 2020. So I know that's quite a few terms here on the slide, but I'll walk you through some of the key findings. So not surprisingly, as you all have been hearing who have been on this call over time, PPE and sanitizing products are still dominating the top searches, as they have since pretty much April of this year. Between last month and this month, the top search term actually stayed pretty consistent, as you can see between the last and the first columns. They've kind of shifted around a bit, but mostly consistent terms. And when you compare to 2019, you can kind of see the drop off in some of our favorites from 2019, like Disney, Harry Potter, Stranger Things. Though Disney's still kind of, staying relevant this year. But they're no longer top of mind, and also you'll see some of these prominent search terms like backpack, back to school items, as well as swim items, no longer prominently featured in July of 2020, given the focus on PPE and COVID related sanitization terms. So in these next two slides, I'll go through just a few of the industries that the top search terms in a few of the industries, and we'll look at them year over year. So again, left column is this year, July 2020, and the right column is July 2019. So you can see in the grocery segment, you can prominently see the demand for PPE, and it's kind of at the cost of some of these more luxury or like outdoor barbecue type of related items on the right hand side. So cake, candy, Coke, those types of things are not in the top search terms this year. And then in the B2B side, you can see the basically the increase again in PPE, but the decrease in office supplies really is prominently featured. You can see by these arrows here. So as Brian was saying, I think it's a lot of these secondary effects of we think of them as consumer behaviors, but it is really felt in the B2B space as well. Next slide, please.
There we go.
Thanks, Brian. And then in the general merchandise and home furnishing categories, you can really see, again, the spike in work from home or remote working type of search terms. So desk, laptop, chairs, prominently featured. And some of the less searched items include luggage and Halloween decor. I didn't actually realize that folks started shopping so early for Halloween. But on the luggage side, for obvious reasons, because of folks are traveling less.
That it?
All right,
Christine?
Brian. Yep,
All right,
back to
cool.
you.
All right. Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm trying to get my mouse to do the right thing. Hello, everyone. Again. So Q&A. If you do have questions, feel free to use the Q&A feature there at the bottom of your window. We did have one question come in from Colin, which I'll take. Colin asks, hey, Brian, this morning Wayfair reported their July growth rate accelerated to 70% year over year from plus 90% in June. Not sure that's an acceleration, but okay. Since you aren't seeing the moderation in the home category, who do you think is gaining share? Omnichannel, Amazon, or maybe smaller players? I think market share gains, I think is going to be hard to predict. I think everyone is seeing, certainly in this category, growth. We were reporting the Bloomreach customer base at plus 40 something percent year over year. So, based on that, you'd have to say Wayfair may have outperformed that in that segment specifically. And so perhaps that means that they are gaining share. I think oh, I'm sorry, you're correct, Colin. I misread it. I apologize. At any rate, I think it's difficult to predict market share shifts on a category by category basis, regardless, based on who reports data and who doesn't. But I think that there are certainly going to be some winners and losers. There are certainly the convenience and ubiquity of an Amazon, even if they're not particularly strong in certain categories, may mean that they are actually increasing share, although they may not necessarily be growing at the highest rate in all categories. Meanwhile, there are certainly consumers who are very actively trying to shop with small business, trying to support small business during these times, even if it's challenging to do so. And certainly category specific, folks like a Wayfair and others, specialty retail and branded manufacturers have seen a pretty dramatic growth, especially if they have brand name recognition. Wayfair is an interesting case as an aggregator, but a very category specific one. So I know I'm not really answering your question directly, I think in part because it's difficult to do so, about a specific company out there or a specific category, given the information that's available. One other question just came in. Any categories that are seeing continued negative year-over-year sales? Not in our data at this point in time. We're not seeing that at this stage in e-commerce specifically. Certainly, overall sales, right, of companies out there is not reflected in this data. So there's going to be cases where e-commerce is compensating for challenges in other channels. And potentially even leading to growth, which is also reflected in our state of commerce experience data, by the way, which I mentioned that report early on in the call, and I'll put that back up here if I can get my mouse into the right position again. I do think it's important for us to recognize that in some cases it's not compensating, right? So even if we're seeing significant growth in online business, it may not obviously be compensating for other impacts. So in our data, we're not seeing e-commerce in negative territory in any specific category at this stage, but that doesn't speak to their overall business, obviously. The next Commerce Pulse report will be September 2nd. Hope you enjoyed this and hopefully it was valuable. Always interested in feedback. We're, of course, proud to represent so many great customers. We're happy that we can aggregate data in the way we can and help tell a story about what's happening in the overall market. And I think it's important that businesses have an opportunity to benchmark and understand how they compare. So you can see the link there to more information. And then just kind of visiting some of the things we mentioned briefly at the top. And again, the impacts and channel shift that I was just speaking about is captured to a great degree in that State of Commerce Experience report. And I would encourage you, if you're interested in understanding the consumer and B2B customer preferences, in addition to how businesses are responding to that, check out that report. I think it actually helps tell a pretty meaningful story. And if you are in retail or brand and manufacturing and you're interested in that, join that virtual event. I think you'll get a lot of valuable insights and additional data some of which is not actually in the report because we had to keep it concise, but I think that'll be a valuable resource for you as well. So with that, I want to thank you so much for your time again today.